Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Ankita and in this video series I will be teaching the subject of system programming and compiler construction. My entire series will be based on the syllabus that is designed by Mumbai University under Computer Engineering branch. This playlist is basically designed for students who wants to clear their concept and are looking for exam oriented preparation. Before wasting much of our time, let us go to the syllabus of the subject. If you can observe, the first module of the system talks about Introduction to System Software. I am pretty sure every student who is listening to me must have heard about the term system program. So, what is system program? Why do we need it? How it is different from an application program? That is what we are going to understand in this module. Apart from it, we'll understand what are the various system programs. We'll go into details of each and every system program. The second module talks about assemblers. How an assembler is designed. What is an assembly language? How an assembler helps in converting a high level language into an assembly level language. So the second module is all about that. The third module, as you can see, is on macros and macroprocessor. How is a macro written? What is a macro? How is a macro different from a function? What is the importance of a macro processor when you want to understand any system program? So this is all about the third module. Under the fourth module, we'll be looking about loaders and linkers. The fifth module, which is very important from Mumbai University point of view, or you can say very important from examination point of view, is compilers analysis phase. And if you can observe, the sixth module also talks about compilers, but it is talking about the synthesis phase of compiler. Both of the modules carry much weightage when you talk about the examination paper. So in the fifth module, we'll understand what is the role of a compiler, what a compiler has to do when it wants to convert a specific high level language into its machine level language or into its intermediate language. So for understanding that, we'll have to understand phases of compiler. Students, please make a note. Phases of compiler is very important topic when it comes to exam. It's very famous, or you can say it is very favorite question of any external examiner who comes for Viva. So this module, as I said again, the module is very important. Then if you can observe, the second part of the same module is syntax analysis. Here we need to understand numericals which are based on LL1 parser topic. Apart from it, we will be covering the numericals on SR parser, operator precedence parser and SLR parser. The last module talks about synthesis phase. It basically helps us in understanding how the compiler creates an intermediate code, how the codes are optimized, and how the final code is generated by the compiler. For preparing my slides, I have used following textbooks. The first one is Donovan, the second one is Aho Ullman, and the third one is Dhamdere. I will really prefer that you also as a student have a hands on these textbooks, because these will be very useful for you to understand my videos very properly. Let us start with the first module. So the first module is Introduction to System Software. The topics that I will be covering in this video is the first topics, that is need of system software. Why do we need system software? Language processing activities arise due to. Now, before we understand why do we need language processing activities, let us understand what is language processing and what are these activities. So, language processing basically is divided into two categories: program language processing and natural language processing. That is NLP. NLP, I guess everybody have heard about it. So what is program language processing? Program language processing means how computer will handle any code, and natural language processing means how computers will handle human text and speech. So these two are different types of language processing. Now, what are various language processing activities? To understand any code, the computer has to convert the high level language program into machine language. This is known by everybody because we know that computers doesn't understand high level language code. So the high level language program has to be converted into machine level language. And for doing this, whatever activities a computer is doing is known as language processing activities. अब इस activities की ज़रूरत क्यों है? क्योंकि there exist the differences between the way in which a software designer describes the ideas concerning the behavior of the software. Let's understand this. So, as I said, हमने हमारा जो सॉफ्टवेयर है वो किसी एक लैंग्वेज में बिल्ड किया है. अब ये जो लैंग्वेज है ये मेरा कंप्यूटर नहीं समझ पाता, इसीलिए we need something known as compilers, interpreters, assemblers, so that my high level language program is somehow understood by the computer. So the slide says there is a difference in which how the software is being described and how this software is implemented in a computer. Now let's for a second assume that there was no हाई लेवल लैंग्वेज प्रोग्राम. मतलब ना हमें सी आता है, ना हमें पाइथन आता है, ना हमें सी प्लस प्लस आता है. देयर इज नो जावा. मीन्स आने का मतलब है देयर डज नॉट एग्जिस्ट एनी हाई लेवल लैंग्वेज प्रोग्राम. यू नीड टू राइट योर कोड either in assembly language or you write your code in machine language which is directly fed to the computer. Then कोई लैंग्वेज प्रोसेसिंग की जरूरत नहीं है. अब अज्यूम करो कि आप अपना प्रोग्राम लिखने वाले हो असेंबली लैंग्वेज में. जस्ट टू मेक इट सिंपल फॉर यू, आई रिपीट, जस्ट टू मेक इट सिंपल फॉर यू, अज्यूम करो कि आप अपना प्रोग्राम जो है वो लिखेंगे असेंबली लैंग्वेज में, और आपको जो एंड यूजर है वो एंड यूजर आपका बताता है दैट यू नीड टू डेवलप अ प्रोग्राम ऑन अ बैंक. सिंपल प्रोग्राम, एक सिंपल प्रोग्राम लेते हैं कि अज्यूम करो कि मैंने आपको प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट दिया दैट इफ देयर इज input by the if the cash is deposited by the user, the balance will be incremented, and if the cash is removed, the balance will be decremented. अब ये चीज अगर आपको implement करना है तो नॉर्मल विथ एनी प्रोग्रामिंग लैंग्वेज थिंग्स आर इजियर. आपने एक वेरिएबल लिया, उसमें ऐड किया और उसमें से डिलीट किया, सो माइनस किया, दैट इज ऑल इजी. बट यही चीज अगर आपको सीधा असेंबली में लिखना है, you need to think about registers, you need to think about various other operations, you have to think about add operation, you have to think about sub operation, you have to think about mov operations, you are moving values from one register to another register. So all these things becomes so difficult, and this is the reason we need various language processing activities. ये झमेले में अगर नहीं पढ़ना है तो language processing की ज़रूरत है. Let's come back to the slide. So the slide says that there's a difference in which how the idea of the software is being discussed. These ideas are related to application domain of the software, and this application domain is known as designer's view. Whereas when these ideas are implemented in a computer system, these ideas are interpreted according to the execution domain of the system. जैसे मैंने बोला कि मुझे यूजर से एक अमाउंट लेना है, वो अगर डिपॉजिट कर रहा है तो मेरा बैलेंस इंक्रीमेंट होगा, एंड if it is withdrawing, then my balance will be decremented. So when I talk about designer's point of view, it is simply addition and subtraction. एक नॉर्मल बच्चा क्या करेगा, ओके बैलेंस 1000 है, 500 ऐड किया, सो 1000 प्लस 500 इज 1500. इट्स सिंपल, दिस इज डिजाइनर्स व्यूज. बट जब मैं इसी चीज को एग्जीक्यूट करूंगी, if I try to write an assembly program on that, it is not so simple. It will not be like 1000 plus 500 is equal to 1500. वो one liner चीज एग्जीक्यूशन डोमेन में नहीं बैठती है, बिकॉज यू नीड टू थिंक अबाउट द अवेलेबल रजिस्टर्स, you have to move value to registers, you have to add value from registers, and again you have to move value to another register. So this is execution domain, and this execution domain is nothing but computer's view. So I hope you have understood that because we do not want to get into this part of the system, we need language processing activities. हमें ये काम नहीं करना है. We want our work to be as simple as possible, and we want computer to do all the headache, computer to take all the headache, and that is why we need language processing activities. Now, to further understand the slides and the subject, these are the terms which I used. First is semantics. What is semantics? Semantics basically represent, or it is the term that is used to represent the rules of a meaning of a domain. So अगर मैं application domain की बात करूँ, I am talking from the designer point of the view. When I'm talking about execution domain, I am thinking about the way the statements will be written. So the writing of statements in execution domain is different. The rules for writing the statements in execution domain is different, and the rule for writing the statement in application domain is different. इसको बोलते हैं semantics. Semantic gap का मतलब क्या है? Semantic gap represents the difference between the semantics of two domains. So what are the difference between the rules of each domain? एप्लीकेशन डोमेन के रूल्स में और एग्जीक्यूशन डोमेन के रूल में क्या डिफरेंस है, उस गैप को आप सिमेंटिक गैप बोलते हो. Assuming this is understood, I'll move to the next. So there exists semantic gap between application domain and execution domain. So the way application domain is written and the way execution domain is written, both have some differences. The rule for writing application domain differs from the execution domain, hence we say that there is a semantic gap. And because of this semantic gap, the time to develop the software, the efforts taken to develop the software will be very high. Apart from it, the quality of the software which is built is also very poor. Take this example. I have two developers with me, one who is comfortable with Java and another who is comfortable with Python. अब दोनों को अगर मैं same problem statement दूँ, obviously the time taken by a Python developer will be less, the efforts of the Python developer will be less compared to the C developer, and the quality of the software obviously will differ. Similarly, एप्लीकेशन डोमेन और एग्जीक्यूशन डोमेन के गैप की वजह से जो सॉफ्टवेयर डेवलप होता है वो पुअर क्वालिटी का होता है. इसीलिए हमें लैंग्वेज प्रोसेसिंग एक्टिविटीज करने पड़ते हैं. So this semantic gap is tackled by software engineering. In other words, software engineering came as a lifesaver for application domain and execution domain. Okay, so I repeat, software engineering came as a lifesaver for this people who were into execution domain. Okay, how this is happening? Software engineering aims at using programming languages that can be grouped into specification, design and coding steps. PL is programming language implementation step. तो जैसे मैंने बताया, एग्जीक्यूशन डोमेन के बंदों को बचाने के लिए आया सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग. अब सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग ने क्या किया? दे इंट्रोड्यूस समथिंग नोन एज प्रोग्रामिंग लैंग्वेज, and these programming language are grouped into specification, designing, coding and implementation. So software engineering introduces a new domain called the PL domain, and this PL domain basically reduces the gap which is existing between application domain and execution domain. Thus, the PL domain acts as a bridge between the application domain and execution domain. There is a gap still existing between application domain and PL domain. This is known as specification gap, and the gap that exists between PL domain and execution domain is known as execution gap. The specification gap is bridged by the designer of a programming language. So यहाँ पे I am telling what will be my software all about. PL domain is responsible for building the software in a programming language. तो PL domain और application domain का जो gap है, ये कौन bridge करता है? Programming language का designer. In other words, someone has designed Python, someone has designed Java, someone has designed C. तो उनको जब input मिला, उन्होंने किसी एक language में उस input को convert करने का try किया. इसको बोलते हैं specification gap. अब प्रोग्रामिंग लैंग्वेज को कंप्यूटर को समझाना है. ओके, सो आई हैव दिस हाई लेवल लैंग्वेज प्रोग्राम व्हिच हैज टू बी मेड अंडरस्टैंड टू द कंप्यूटर. and that is bridged by the designer of programming language processor. तो प्रोग्रामिंग लैंग्वेज प्रोसेसर का काम क्या है? पीएल डोमेन और एग्जीक्यूशन डोमेन के गैप को ब्रिज करना. ओके, which is either an interpreter or it can be a translator. The specification gap is the semantic gap between the two specifications of the same task. Okay, now what is this line all about? I repeat the line once again. The specification gap is the semantic gap between the specifications of the same task. If you remember, the specification gap existed between application domain and PL domain. अब ये जो दोनों डोमेन है वो सेम काम करता है, लेकिन दोनों के स्पेसिफिकेशन में फर्क है. Okay, I repeat, the specification gap is existing between application domain and PL domain. Application domain बताता है कि मेरा सॉफ्टवेयर ऐसा दिखना चाहिए. PL डोमेन वो सॉफ्टवेयर उसी तरह से बनाता है, उसी तरह से वो उसी स्टेटमेंट्स पे वो काम करता है. तो दोनों सेम चीज पे काम करते हैं, लेकिन दोनों के लिखने का तरीका अलग है, इसीलिए उसको स्पेसिफिकेशन गैप बोलते हैं. Okay, execution gap is the semantic gap between the semantics of a program that perform the same task but written in different programming languages. Now, execution gap is existing between PL domain and execution domain. अब PL domain में program किसी एक language में लिखा है, execution domain में वो same program किसी और language में लिखा है. दोनों काम तो same करते हैं, but दोनों के लिखने का तरीका अलग है, दोनों के रूल्स अलग है. The way the rules used for writing the program in PL domain differs from the rules for writing a program in execution domain. So these are the two gaps, specification and execution gap. I assume things are understood. If you have not understood, you all can please comment which slide you have not understood. I'll put the explanation in your as a reply in your comment. Each domain has a specification language. अब हर डोमेन का अपना एक लैंग्वेज है, आप किसी भी लैंग्वेज में कुछ भी नहीं लिख सकते. ओके, a specification written in SL is a program in SL. Okay, a specification written in specification language, you call it as a program in specification language. The specification language of the PL domain is the programming language itself. तो जैसे मैंने बताया, PL domain में मैं जिस language में अपना program लिखूंगी वो होगा specification language, and that is nothing but my programming language also. Lastly, the specification language of the execution domain is the machine language of the computer. If you have heard properly, you will understand what this box is saying and what this box is saying. If you have not understood, I will request you to go to the previous recordings and get a clear idea of what is all about. Language processors. So we started our explanation with language processing activities. अब ये language processing activities करने के लिए हमें अलग-अलग language processors की ज़रूरत होती है. तो क्या है language processor and what are the various language processors? A language processor is a software which bridges a specification or execution gap. It is a system programming that bridges the gap between how a user describes a computation and how a computer executes the program. So it is the language processor which is now bridging the gap between how I am describing my software and how the same software is executed by the computer. What is language processing? The activities those are performed by a language processor is known as language processing. Any input to a language processor is known as a source program, and the output of a language processor is known as the target program. The languages in which the above mentioned programs are written are also known as source language and target language. Last point, which is known by everybody, a language processor typically abandons the generation of target program if it detects errors in the source program. तो ये आपको सबको पता है, कभी भी कोई प्रोग्राम एग्जीक्यूट हो रहा है, जनरेट हो रहा है, या फिर when the target program is in process of generation and if the processor gets an error, obviously it will stop the generation of the target program. What are the various language processors? One is language translator, there's detranslator, there is preprocessor, there is language migrator. Language translator bridges an execution gap to assembly language. That means it translates high level language into assembly language. Detranslator means you can say your assembler. Assembler क्या करता है? High level language input लेता है और उसको assembly language में convert करता है. So an example of language translator is assembler. Detranslator obviously works in the reverse manner. Preprocessor, it is a language processor which bridges an execution gap, but it is not a translator. In other words, it converts one language to another language. I'll put an example on the slide. A language migrator bridges specification gap between two PLs, between two programming languages. Let us understand. So here I have my C++ preprocessor. The input to the C++ processor is a C++ program, which you call it as a source program. And the output, that is my target program, is nothing but my C program. While performing this translation, while performing the conversion of C++ program to C program, if this preprocessor gets any error, it will halt the conversion of source program into target program. An example of translator, a C++ program, when converted into machine level language program, you call the processor as a translator. So the above language processor converts a C++ program into machine language program. Hence it is known as a translator. So you can have various processors depending on what is our requirement. Finally, what is a software? It is a collection of data, instructions, programs, and rules that instructs a computer system or other electronic device to work efficiently, perform, and carry out specific tasks. Software are basically of two types, system software and application software. So we have already heard this term application software. तो अगर यहाँ पे आप slide पे देखेंगे, hardware, the next layer is system software, the next layer is application software, and the last layer is user. This is the place where your OS resides, and this is the place where your system software or system program resides. So let us understand by definition what is it. System software acts as an interface between application software and hardware. यानी application software को hardware से बात करना है तो ये बंदा उसका middleman है. Application software acts as an interface between user and system software. मतलब user को अगर system software से बात करना है, then it is the application software which will help us to do so.